and I'm not going to hesitate with the fundamentalists because I think they are very cult-like. These cults, like if everybody rose up against them, they'd be powerless, right? But there's a certain degree of like mind control and authority and fear that's get struck into their believers, and so yeah, it kind of paralyzes them.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Learn with Lowell. Today we have an amazing episode. We're going to dive into the enigmatic world of Mormonism. We have someone join us today. His name's Tom, the alternative Mormon. Tom is not his name. We get into that. He is going to talk to us about the history of Mormonism, his spirituality, why he's transitioning. He's going to talk to us about polygamy as well, all that fun stuff. We also get into his thoughts on presidents, China, private prisons, you name it. This is a great episode if you want to just kind of sit back and hear it straight from someone's mouth, what Mormonism is like. I think sometimes you get fed things on the internet or from the news. And so it's just kind of fun to hear someone who's actually in it describe what is it like being a missionary and why maybe we should be nicer to them. Or at the very least, give us some tips on getting them to stay away. I want to thank everyone for coming out today. And please, let's stay curious and learn about Mormonism with Tom, the alternative Mormon, on this episode of Learn with Lowell. What originally got you involved in the Mormon church, Mormon faith?
So I was actually born into the Mormon faith. Both my parents also were born into it. In fact, if you follow my family history, my ancestors all the way back to the original start of the church in the 1830s, 1840s was kind of when some of my ancestors joined. Not all of them, but I have some lines that go back to pioneer people who even came across the plains to Utah. So yeah, it's definitely ingrained in my, not quite to my genes. It's not a race or a specific culture, but it is kind of ingrained in my ancestry a little bit. So yeah, I've been in for a long time.
Do you get any benefits in the church for being a legacy in that way, or do they not care about heritage?
No, I mean it's just cool. So like,
okay,
one of my, I think he's my 3 great grandfathers was actually one of the prophets or the presidents of the church back in the late 1800s. And so the only benefit of that is it's just kind of cool. It's kind of bragging rights. When I was a kid, we used to go to.
At any point in this conversation, if you find value in it, please subscribe. It is hugely beneficial, and it tells Google and everyone out there that this is content worth watching. Thank you for everyone thus far who has commented, liked, subscribed, and told their friends.
They'd have like little events for him. His name's Wilford Woodruff. You can Google him and look him up. They'd have little like events, and he was a polygamist, just like other early Mormons. So like there's a million of his descendants, in Utah. So they do little things where you'd be able to go and meet other people who were related to him, but it's not like I knew him, distant third, fourth cousins, and possibly through different wives. So
there's not like a master alternative Mormon family reunion that happens where it's like you take over a convention center.
Well, there might be, but that's not because of my heritage. It's probably just because, I actually have a large family. My grandma, I think, had like 10 or 11 siblings because she had a mixed family. But anyway, no, related to the heritage of the church, no real benefits.
And if I remember correctly, you're transitioning out of the church. Are you maintaining the faith itself, or is it just like the spiritual aspect of the faith, or is it just like the church, like the Catholic Church, like you're leaving the Catholic Church and like still going to be Catholic in your heart, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it's actually kind of the opposite. Like I still occasionally go to the church, but I've more transitioned away from how I am religiously and spiritually. I am in the process of probably physically transitioning away from the church as well. My family and I go occasionally, but mostly just for the community aspects at this time. In Utah, the church is a pretty big part of communities. In Utah, at least where I live, down in Salt Lake City, it's not quite this way, but where I live, the majority are active LDS members. So in order to just maintain some community, we still occasionally go.
What are the core beliefs? My exposure to people of the Mormon faith is Brandon Sanderson, Chris Stuckman, which you were telling me it's a different type of thing, which is interesting. And then every now and again, there's like Mormons on a street corner that like will sit there and wait for you to engage, like make eye contact, and they start telling you things, and then which I actually find kind of irritating. But when people come up to your door, those are all my exposures to people of the faith.
Yeah, so I get those. You get South Park. A lot of people have seen the South Park
Mm,
Mormon episode. There are a few other famous Mormons. Obviously you have Mitt Romney, who ran for president in what was that, 2012. And you have so like if you're into music, Brandon Flowers of the Killers is a Mormon. Um, Dan Reynolds of Imagine Dragons has recently transitioned away from being a Mormon. Tyler Glenn from Neon Trees was a Mormon. He's since left. And so there there are some famous Mormons out there. But yeah, a lot of people aren't maybe familiar with the key parts of it. I did actually spend some time as a Mormon missionary, so I understand your frustration with them, because I unfortunately was the guy knocking on doors and standing on street corners. I spent time on campuses and tracking down students as they were hustling to class, and yeah, it's not fun on that side of the conversation either. It's awkward, and you just feel like you have to do it. But sorry, what was your question before that?
just what I'm definitely gonna ask you, like, maybe some tips to get people to stop coming to my door. But
Yeah.
just like what causes you to be a missionary? Like, why is that? Like, I guess at the same time, I was raised Lutheran, and they were still like, "Hey, we're sending missionaries to like Africa." So I don't think
Yeah.
it's that big of a difference to like want to knock on someone's door or hand out Bibles in America. But at the same time, I'm just curious, like, what are the core tenets of Mormonism that resonate with you in particular?
Yeah, so I would get that question a lot because I spent my mission in Indiana, as we were talking about a little bit off air, which is predominantly Christian. And so I would get that question all the time, like, what are you even doing here? Like, we're Christians, you're Christians. Um, but we also, and I shouldn't say we, because I don't represent the church. And like I say, I'm transitioning away, but the church also sends missionaries to foreign places like Africa and, Asia and South America. But the main reason is the church believes that they are literally the restored church of Jesus Christ. So basically, if you take the history of Christianity, Jesus was here on earth. He had his 12 apostles or 12 disciples after Jesus died and was resurrected left. They went on for a while, and then the Catholics claim that authority has continued to this day, right? That Peter was sort of the first pope. I know I'm oversimplifying it if any Catholics are listening, but basically that line continued on. The LDS Church or Mormon Church has the same idea as kind of the Protestants, that okay, somewhere along the line the Catholics kind of screwed it up, and maybe authority was lost. And so the Protestants kind of, a lot of them maybe don't focus as much on authority. They're just more focused on the grace of Christ. But then the Mormon doctrine, and I don't have to give a full history lesson, although I can later if you want. The Mormon doctrine, basically in the 1800s, it's this idea that literally through angelic ministration, through visions and like angelic visitation, that Joseph Smith, the first prophet, received this authority that the ancient apostles had and was able to restore or reorganize this Church of Christ. So the reason you see Mormon missionaries even in the US is their idea is that although they're Christians and Protestants are Christians and Catholics are Christians, that the Mormon church has sort of like the true Christianity is one way to say it, like the true church, but also like the true authority to baptize, to do all these things. So their idea is that, yeah, we are still sending people to Christian countries where people are predominantly Christian, but we're trying to get them in, if Christianity is this huge building, we're trying to get them in our specific room, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. There's a Protestant Reformation where people were getting like burnt alive for being like, 1 degree separated from Catholicism.
Yeah.
Did the Mormons face any of that? I mean, I think predominantly you were in America, which hopefully did not do that. I would hope that people weren't like attacking
That's
people's
actually
faith
a
and stuff.
that's actually a fascinating piece of U.S. history. In fact, I love Mormon church history. I'm kind of a nerd about it, and the reason is because it is so interestingly intertwined with U.S. history. So the Mormon church is the largest, as far as I know, the largest American-made religion. Now, I think like Methodists, like the Wesleyans, I think they're technically American made as well. I can't remember, but anyway, the main ones you have that maybe are different from Protestantism is you have Mormonism, Jehovah's Witnesses were American made, and then you have Seventh-day Adventists. And I know a lot of Christians, all three of those, a lot of kind of Protestant Christians would kind of clump those as like cult type religions. And so but they are all three American made, and they're all actually kind of sprung up in the same 30, 40 years. To give you, I know I said I wasn't going to do a full history lesson, but a lot of these questions are hard to do without. So yeah, Mormonism started with Joseph Smith, who was the founder, or members of the church would just call him the one who restored the church. And he's considered a prophet. To try to keep it brief, when he was in his late teenage years, early 20s, he started to write, or what he said, translate a record, which is called the Book of Mormon. You know, that's like the Book of Mormon musical. You'll see, like I say, the South Park episode talks about this. Although it's not exactly a faith promoting episode, if you want a 30-minute kind of humorous episode, that's a great summary of kind of the history of Mormonism. And actually they get a lot of it right, because the founders of South Park are ex-Mormons, or at least one of them is. And so anyway, he built this Book of Mormon, had this Book of Mormon, which was supposed to be an ancient record from the American people. With this, he started the church in 1830. April 6th, 1830 was the year the church was founded. And that happened in New York. And then they eventually moved to Kirtland, Ohio, and Missouri. If you go to Kirtland, Ohio, there's still old church history stuff. There's the first temple they built in Kirtland. And unfortunately, there was a ton of persecution, and there's a couple of reasons for that. The first one is probably, people just didn't understand it or didn't like it. The interesting thing about the church history compared to the U.S. history, though, is it's actually a fascinating discussion about the balance of freedom of religion versus freedom of speech versus freedom of press, because the main reason people were mad, and I've only learned this in the last few years. When I was a kid growing up, they always tell you, well, the reason, they got drove out of state to state was just because they were being persecuted, religious persecution. The history of it's a lot more interesting, a lot more complicated. The reason they were so mad is these group of Mormons came and they'd clump together in a community, and they would start voting together as a block. So like Joseph Smith would say, okay, the Democrat candidate is the most supportive of Mormons. They're the most likely to help us. So everybody, these 5,000 people or whatever, all of us are going to vote for this candidate. Now you can see why these transplants moving into a community and then just changing the dynamics of the Democratic vote would make some people a little bit mad. And this was, they were in Ohio, they were in Missouri, they were actually split between the two for a while. Like this was the frontier of the United States in the 1800s. Yeah. And so the legal system was pretty sketchy back then. We've come a long ways. And so you can kind of sympathize, not that it's okay to persecute someone because of their religion, but you can sympathize why people in that area felt like they had to do this extra legal justice of burning down houses. There were people getting tarred and feathered. There's even a couple instances in Missouri that it did get to violence and death. There was some massacres. You can even Wikipedia, there's something called the Mormon Missouri War. So there was a little war, but it's more of a couple skirmishes of things. That eventually led short term to them moving to Illinois, where eventually Joseph Smith was shot and killed. Again, it's hard to give a full, you could spend hours talking about this history, but the main reason he was persecuted, shot, and killed was there was a lot going on. But at the end of his life, there was a newspaper, kind of a defamatory newspaper that came out and was saying Joseph Smith's a polygamist. It was a secret at the time that he was a polygamist, that he's trying to hoard all this power and stuff. And so as the mayor, lieutenant governor of his militia, and prophet of his church, he kind of had a lot of power and did command that his local city militia go and destroy this newspaper press. So that's why I'm saying it's an interesting conversation of, okay, as an American people, we believe in the freedom of religion. We believe in the freedom of speech. We believe in the freedom of press. But what happens when those collide, right? Which side of the freedom gets the upper hand? Do you have the freedom of religion where you just say, yeah, sure, it's fine if your religion says you can go destroy presses, or do you respect the press? And so again, it just escalated. And then all of these mobs decided to take extra legal justice, killed Joseph Smith and his brother. And then that, as the history goes, that's how the Mormons left Illinois. I think a lot of people have seen the Mormon pioneers. They're familiar with the Mormon pioneers that went from Illinois to Utah, led by Brigham Young, who, Brigham Young University, BYU, is named after. And yeah, so just due to persecution, but I think persecution is a little bit simplistic, because it was a really complicated situation. I'm not saying that it's okay, because if you read about the persecution and the extra legal justice, a lot of it is, it's wrong. But at the same time, like, you can, if you put yourself in their shoes, maybe you can understand it. But the Mormon church definitely has a history of persecution, of being driven out of their place, being driven out of their homes, until they came to Utah, which at the time wasn't part of the United States. It was actually part of Mexico. Shortly after they came, it became a territory. And then my fifth grade teacher will be mad at me. I can't remember what year, but Utah State became an actual state. So
it's interesting then, especially if this like actually 5,000 versus like a number, just to make the point. Because in Ohio, there's only like Tennessee only had like 25, 30,000 people at that time. Ohio had about 50,000 people. So if you're rolling around with a solid 5,000, that's 10% of the population of a state. A voting population is probably even greater than that as a proportion. So you're going around and just like wielding like a giant, and especially if there are people who don't like what you're saying. There's a lot of cases in especially the early years of our republic where like people were just like, oh, you're on another party, and they started like dueling in the courthouses and stuff. Like what was his name, Andrew Jackson, I think, like dueled a bunch of people just for fun. Well, then maybe not just for fun, but like they would say inappropriate things about his wife, and he would just duel them and shoot them and stuff. So it's a very like rough and rumble type of period of time, and then you add that component to it. And democracy in that form was really like, before that, I think we had pirates and like the Athenians to pull from in terms of like how to run that type of system. So it was very much like an experiment, like figuring out like how do you get along. I think we're probably a little better than that, but then a little bad too. Like we're still working on that. But do you if you could have, like, I know this is kind of like a meta question, but like Utah does seem like the perfect place for a bunch of people to go and kind of like displace the political will of the area, or like at least the people who have the guns to like move them out. So it seems like a pretty good spot to like bunker down and then just do your own thing out there. I can't imagine in too many other states, like maybe Nevada, but then Nevada's kind of like known as like Sin City, or what, has like Las Vegas and stuff. So it kind of seems like it's like Utah was like the perfect place and the perfect time for Mormons to like find a home where like people wouldn't be too obnoxious to them.
yeah, you basically quoted Brigham Young, because anyone who went to elementary school in Utah is taught the famous story of Brigham Young. When the pioneers came across, he supposedly had a vision of the Salt Lake Valley, the Great Salt Lake Valley, and they came up over the mountains, and he was sick. I can't remember, with like cholera or something. And they turned his wagon around, and supposedly he said, "This is the right place," and kind of put his staff in the ground. And it was this like Moses-like experience. Yeah. And it's kind of this legendary Utah moment. So yeah, when you said this is the perfect place, I mean, that's basically what Brigham Young said. But it was a desert, like if you go to Salt Lake today, you're going to see a lot of greenery. And that's because, we've built canals, we've built water infrastructure, but originally, it was kind of a dry valley full of sagebrush. And yeah, you had the Great Salt Lake, but obviously the Great Salt Lake, doesn't add much as far as drinking water and stuff, because it's higher salinity than the ocean. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it was good because it was surrounded by mountains. It was far away from the current United States. Eventually they made it. And that's part of our history too, because, for a while the state of Utah, or the territory of Deseret, as it was called, could kind of function with its own government. It was kind of a theocracy in a sense, because the prophet of the church sort of was also the territorial governor. the United States put a stop to that once they made it a state, and they said, no, your prophet can't be the governor. Obviously that goes against some separation of church and state problems. But yeah, for a while, it was kind of just this secluded area, which probably is why, like, if you come to Utah, we do have some unique cultural elements, and that's probably because we did have, these 30-40 years that we were somewhat separated from the United States and built our own culture, built our own kind of religious dynamic. So
Yeah, and I hear Post Malone lives out there and he likes it. Like, apparently everyone's really nice, even though he's like full of tattoos and stuff. Like, he talks about it. It's like, but at the same time, he's like, no, don't move here, because then he'll change it.
yeah,
Like, it's actually a nice place too. Like, people aren't just like nice to each other, but they're nice to people who like literally look different too.
yeah, I think Post Malone is like probably one of the treasures of Utah we have right now. It's awesome. I think he lives in Park City, which is like a ski town. That's where all the rich people live, is Park City, which is like 20-30 minutes east of Salt Lake City. It's kind of up in the mountains. But yeah, I've lived in Utah my whole life. There are aspects of it that are bizarre. But I get that from everybody, like, oh, Mormons, sure, I don't believe in their faith, but like, you guys are so nice. And I agree with that. I mean, I like the state. I would say the same thing as Post Malone, don't come here, because for a while, I think Boise, Idaho, of anywhere in the United States, at least recently, was the highest or fastest growing metro area.
Yeah.
And Salt Lake City, I think, was second behind that. So yeah, we have been experiencing a lot of growth, especially after the COVID era, when people realized, oh, we don't have to live in California to have this high paying tech job. We can actually buy a house we can afford, get out of California politics, California traffic. And so, yeah, I mean, I think we've seen that not just in Utah, in lots of places, just kind of this moving out of, dense suburban areas, and Utah's been a victim of that as well.
Yeah. So I haven't read the Mormon book Bible. Is it like okay to call it the Mormon Bible, or is there like a specific term for it?
Yeah, that's fine. The technical name is the Book of Mormon.
Okay, Book of Mormon.
But that's fine.
I don't want to like sit here and like use the wrong nomenclature. Book of Mormon. In what ways does it differ from like the Christian Bible?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So the word Mormon is kind of weird, right? So the idea is the Book of Mormon is actually named after a character in the Book of Mormon. So kind of like in the Bible, you would have the Book of Samuel. It's the Book of Mormon is one of the books in the Book of Mormon. So the basically the premise of the Book of Mormon is that it's supposedly this ancient record of Native American peoples, and that the idea, and this is a contemporary idea as the Book of Mormon was written, by the way, but it was this idea that the Native Americans were actually Israelites, and that about 600 years before Christ, this group of Israelites left Jerusalem. They traveled via ship across the ocean. They landed in the Americas. They set up a civilization. There are some like racial undertones in it, and maybe undertones is a soft word, because the whole plot is that this group divides into a righteous group and a wicked group. The righteous group are still Israelites. They're kind of, typical Israelite race, so not white like a European, but the wicked group is cursed with a dark skin. And you can see why that's maybe racially problematic. But then the main plot of it is that eventually, over a period of about 1,000 years, so in 400 years before Christ, this wicked dark-skinned group eventually kills off the more righteous light-skinned group. And that supposedly is how the Native Americans came to be. Now, that's been disproven since then with DNA evidence. The leading science on it, the leading DNA evidence says that Native Americans are probably Asian in descent and arrived via the Bering Strait across Alaska and Russia, where they think they made a land bridge and they could have walked across there 10 or 20,000 years ago or whatever. So that
about 12.
The science is pretty set on that. So that's been refuted in the Book of Mormon. The other stuff about the Book of Mormon. So it's basically like the idea is that the Bible talks about the Israelites in Jerusalem area, and their origins and stuff, but that this group of people also had dealings with God. They had prophets. The crowning moment of the Book of Mormon is actually, it's in the middle, which is when Jesus himself, supposedly after he's resurrected, descends and visits these people in the Americas. And so basically it's similar to the Bible, and it even quotes the Bible. There's some Isaiah verses. Some of the stuff Jesus says in Jerusalem is quoted verbatim in the Americas, which is problematic as well, if you're looking at it from a historical standpoint. But basically it's the same idea, but totally different stories, totally different scripture, if you will, because it's supposedly a different people.
But outside of the stories themselves, or like in Christianity, for instance, like the angels are actually quite ugly. Like it's actually like the demons that look cool.
Yeah.
Which is interesting that now that the angels look good, like in modern portrayal, they look like handsome things. And it's like, well, if like demons were like running things, like that's what they'd want you to think. Like the nice looking ones are the good ones, and the ugly looking ones are the bad ones. Like they're flipping it. But like in the Bible, like they're like hideous looking creatures. Like people have like done renditions of them, and they're like 50 eyes.
Yeah, I've seen those.
Like they're like 20 wings. I don't know. Like so does any of that change, or is it really just like the implementation and like the story changes?
It doesn't talk about that kind of stuff as much. There are angels in it, but Mormon theology is very much that like angels are like us. They're kind of, what would you say, like a human in nature. So like the Book of Mormon, the starting of the Book of Mormon was Joseph Smith claimed to have a vision that the angel Moroni is the name, visited him. And if you ever see a Mormon temple, at least one that's been built before the last couple of years, on the top of the angel, or the top of the temple, there's an angel blowing a trumpet. And supposedly that's the angel Moroni. And the angel Moroni is actually a character, like a living person in the Book of Mormon. So the Mormon theology is that angels are basically just people that like either have died and are like, it's their spirit, or like, I don't know if that sort of makes sense. So it's like humans and angels.
They're not separate.
Yeah, they're not
like
separate.
A separate entity.
No, not like a separate creature or whatever you want to call them. Like they're very human in nature. So.
And then, well, it sounds like you still have a lot of respect for the history and some of the faith elements. So, what's causing you to transition out? And then, what does transitioning mean? If it sounds like you'll still have appreciation for it as you move out.
Yeah, so that is a great question, and that's the whole reason I started the podcast that I call Alternative Mormon, because I see myself as kind of an oddity. So Mormonism is what I would use the term high demand, is a high demand religion. Some people prefer to use the word cult. I try to avoid that word because I think it's a little bit of a buzzword. Just because it's not very descriptive, because cult could probably describe, if you look at the definition of a cult, it could probably describe anything from very simple Methodist or Protestantism Christianity to like Jim Jones and the Kool-Aid, right? Like, so there's this huge, I just don't like the word cult. It's not that I think it's wrong, because I think it's probably accurate. But it's just that it's not very descriptive, and it's kind of an emotional word. But anyway, Mormonism is a high demand religion. And so because of that, a lot of people who learn for themselves that they don't believe it tend to not have much respect for it. They get pretty angry, pretty pissed off. And they're like, why have I been lied to my whole life? And even some go so far as they want to tear down the church, or they want to try to pull other people out of the church. I don't see it that way. I mean, I still like, there's days I'm angry or whatever. But the only person I can really be angry at is myself, if I am angry. But I have lots of family members who are still members of the church. And I think for the most part, at least today's version of the church, it's mostly good. There are some harmful elements. And so I'm talking out against the harmful elements. So like the blind obedience to a leader, or like the policies of like we've had harmful policies throughout the years. We used to have harmful policies towards Black people. Now we have harmful policies, in my view, towards LGBT people. And so like, yeah, I'm going to speak out about that. But like as a whole, I think it's the system isn't good, but like the people are good. So like, I'm going to be respectful to the people. I'm going to be respectful to the religion and, do what I can. And the other reason I'm sort of this alternative Mormon or like a little bit of an oddity is because Mormonism is such like a literalistic religion where like it's either true or it's not. A lot of these people that leave, they just abandon religion. And I'm not saying that's wrong. People can do whatever they want. But they choose to become sort of like atheists or nihilists or like they just don't want anything to do with religion. And like I say, that's their choice. But I actually still have a belief in Jesus. I still consider myself a Christian. Although nowadays I kind of call myself a Christian agnostic. Where like, yeah, I believe in God. I believe in Jesus, but like it's not really defined. It's kind of loose. But I want to keep that belief because it's like, yeah, that belief resonates with me. I like that. And so that's what my podcast is all about, is like, taking the good and leaving the bad, trying to be, respectful to the faith. I'm trying to build sort of a non-threatening environment for both active Mormons, transitioning Mormons, and ex-Mormons, so that they don't feel like I'm, attacking their religion, and so that they can feel safe about that. So yeah, that's kind of the idea there. As far as what transitioning looks like, it is sort of probably weird to a lot of religious people, because like Catholics, and not, I've been railing on Catholics a lot. I have respect for Catholics. I don't mean to rail on them. But the typical Catholic is like, you go to church on Easter and Christmas, right? And so like to a Catholic, it's like, what? Like you don't go to church, so you're not a Mormon? Like that doesn't make sense. And but in the church, like there's definitely like a set of expectations to follow, like don't drink alcohol or go to church every Sunday, all this stuff. And so like within the church, there's this distinction between like a full believing member and then someone who just kind of transitions away. So I still call myself a Mormon. That's why I call myself the alternative Mormon, is because like I'm weird, but like I was saying earlier, like these are my ancestors, right? So like culturally, I'm very much a Mormon. Like well, I won't say how old I am, just because I don't want to give docs too much personal information. But like, I'm
33.
Yeah, exactly. And I've never drinking alcohol, so it's like I'm weird, right? Like that's super
Alcohol's
weird.
not that interesting. It's
Well,
boring.
yeah. I mean, for some people, it's their life.
Yeah. Yeah. Go to Wisconsin sometime. They drink everyone else under the table.
There you go. But like, so there's aspects of my upbringing that are just like, I'm super weird, right? And like, I've just come to like love the weirdness of my upbringing, weirdness of my culture. And like, I am a Mormon. And like, I've had people, like, as I've started promoting my podcast, I've had some members of the church push back and say like, oh, you're not a Mormon, you're not allowed to use that title. I'm like, why not? Like, sure, I don't believe it, but like, I feel like I can identify however I want. Like, and that sounds maybe kind of arrogant, but it's like, look, like if I feel like I'm still a Mormon, like, yeah, I don't believe it and I'm different, but like, yeah, it's very much a part of who I am. And I have, basically 30 years of life in the church. Why would how could I just forget that and pretend like it wasn't a major part of my life,
Yeah. We're, so you guys never did like the Sunday thing where they give you wine, like the blood of Christ?
No, so we do it with water and bread.
Oh, that's
and
fun.
Yeah, it's no fun. Yeah, that would have been a lot funner
wafer.
as a kid to be like, oh sweet, I get a little bit of wine.
Still doesn't taste good.
Yeah, I'm sure it does. But yeah, it's water and bread. If to anyone that's curious, like honestly, like look up a Mormon church near you, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Visitors are welcome. I will warn you, like you're going to be really welcomed, but you're going to be like weirded out how welcomed you are. Like you're probably going to get swarmed and people are going to like try to get missionaries to teach you and try to baptize you and stuff. But like, if you want to learn about it, like I'm a little bit jaded, right? So like you're going to get a little bit of a biased take from me, but like go to go to the horse's mouth in a sense, like if you're curious, because like, yeah, you can see a service. It's not, they do have temples that you have to be a member to go to, but they're church services like anyone can go to. You can go take the sacrament. You can go listen to what they talk about. You can, now I'm sounding like I'm proselytizing for them, but like you can have the missionaries come visit you if you want. To answer your earlier question of how to get them to avoid you, like honestly, as a missionary, I loved talking to people, and I loved, like, a lot of people were overly nice to me. Like Indiana people are, well, you're from the Midwest, like you get it. Like people are nice,
Yeah.
right? I had a few instances where people, there were a lot of people that are antagonistic. I had very few instances where people actually were like, F you, and slammed the door in my face. Like that happened, but it was rare. And so like, I'd encourage you to be nice to missionaries. They're usually like 19-year-old kids. And so
They are. Yeah. They
yeah,
dress
but
nice though. That's
yeah,
nice
they
too.
dress nice. Unfortunately, they have to wear white shirts and ties on bikes, which, like, you're getting your slacks caught in the chain of your bike and all sorts of fun stuff. But yeah, I mean, like if people want to learn, like, have the missionaries come teach you. Honestly, like, you don't have to be baptized if you have the missionaries teach you. They'll teach you. To get rid of them, just like honestly tell them, like, look, like, to be honest with you, I just wanted to learn about your faith. Thank you so much. I'm never going to get baptized, and they'll probably drop you because they are taught, I was taught as a missionary, okay, seek out those who are actually committed, that aren't going to just waste your time and learn lessons. But they always have this like thread of hope that you're going to switch your mind and become, and maybe you do. I don't, honestly, I don't care if people convert to Mormonism. I think if that's what brings them happiness, like, there are some people who leave the church and they just want to, like, they want to prevent people from joining, or they want to make people leave. And it's like, I feel like that's immoral of me. Like, if someone finds happiness or peace for them and their family, like, that would be immoral of me to go out of my way to tear that down. That just seems kind of douchey to me.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, I mean, if people are curious, like, it's pretty easy to get in touch with the missionaries. You can have 4 or 5 lessons with them, and then just tell them, yeah, I'm not interested. And they will leave you alone. They might text you a few more times or nag you or whatever. But like, if you want, I'm going to be biased in the non-believing direction. If you want a bias take in the believing direction and you're just curious what it's like, yeah, reach out to the missionaries, go to a church service. Like, that is one of the best things about Mormonism, like, very welcoming to non-members. So I'd encourage anyone who's curious, check that out, or check out my podcast. A little bit of, shameless.
There'll be links in the show notes. Yeah.
Yeah.
There'll be links. And the intro should build you up there as well. I just didn't know if there's like a way to, like, like with snails, you put salt around them and then they can't leave the circle. I don't know if, like, I put like salt down on my driveway or something. Like,
Yeah.
they can't come up it. Like, I don't know if that's just me being a smart ass though.
No,
just sounds like
you're
just be polite and say no, thank you.
Yeah, the easiest way. Oh, that's a good question, because let me think of my time as a missionary. What made me stop going to people's house? Well, the easiest way, like, honestly, is to be a total jackass to them. But like, I wouldn't recommend that,
That seems kind
because
of mean. Yeah.
that's
like,
mean,
I think a
right?
no thank you seems effective if they are.
A no
nice.
thank you seems somewhat effective. Like, if you literally don't want them there, like, you could berate them. But like I say, I wouldn't recommend that, because I think that's not nice. Because like, then they will put notes in their, like, they have, well, nowadays they have iPads. When I was a missionary, we were pen and paper and binders of notes on, we called them the area book. So you would make a note that says, like, this house does not like missionaries. Do not knock on this door unless you want to be cussed at. And so, like, that's the easiest way, but I don't think that's the most moral way. But I mean, like, honestly, if you really were annoyed with missionaries, you could even tell them, like, hey, like, I know you guys keep notes on, like, houses and stuff. Like, will you make a note? We call it like a do not contact, like, just like, please don't come back. And then hopefully they'll leave you alone. But no, I don't know of any secret rituals or things to say to make them permanently leave you alone, unfortunately.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Because like there's been a couple times where, I watch horror films every now and again, and so I was just like, if this was like at 7 p.m., just right at dusk, and you see just like a bunch of people dressed like really nicely, and they like huddle up and they just slowly start descending the neighborhood. It's like, this is kind of ominous. It's like they just want to talk about religion, but like, it's like in the setup. Sometimes I like, how can you make it kind of like ominous if like it was just at dusk and they came out, and like I've just seen them just like meet, and they're always really nice. And so I just feel like there's just a couple of horror movies that basically start with that premise. So I'm always like, oh, this is interesting. But so then at the same time, it'd be kind of ironic with the sense that like you're kind of like an alternative Mormon. It's people more than likely are going to be more open to what you have to say. So it'd be ironic if more people go into Mormonism because of you.
Yeah, that would be weird, and I wouldn't be opposed to it. And to be fair, like my podcast may be difficult for some people to listen to if they don't have a Mormon background, because I don't usually, and I don't mean this offensively, but I don't usually like slow down to explain Mormonese, if that makes sense. Like
Sure.
I just kind of assume people know what I'm talking about. And I'm actually trying to do that better in my episodes, because I am recognizing, like, you know, I might have some people who watch my show who aren't familiar with this. And so I am trying to do a better job of like explaining terms and stuff. But
sure.
So my target audience is a little bit niche. You know, it's probably like people who are somewhat familiar with Mormonism. But no, that would be funny. And like honestly, like I don't care. Like I say, if people are happy about it, you know, if people want to ask me, like if people are thinking about converting and they want a non or maybe a less biased take than they'll get from the missionaries, I mean, they could email me and ask me, and I'd say, yeah, you know, that's great. Maybe check out these issues, check out these problems, and if you're comfortable with these issues and these problems and you can reconcile, then yeah, go ahead. I don't mind.
Yeah. So, what were the things that you feel lied to about?
So, like I said, Mormonism is a very literalistic black and white view. So like it is important. Like if the Book of Mormon isn't what it says it is, well, then we have problems, right? Because then that means Joseph Smith was at best twisting the truth, at worst a fraud or a con man. And so there's a big emphasis on that in the church. And like I don't think the church purposefully hides or purposefully deceives, but it, like any organization, it's going to share the stuff that matches its best interest, right? And amazingly, like I've had doubts my whole life about aspects of the Book of Mormon, or about these prophets. You know, do we follow the prophets? Are they infallible? And no, of course they're fallible. They're people. But like it took me a long time to finally, I don't want to say see the light, because that would be offensive to active members, but like to finally be able to be like, whoa, there's problems. Like, so I kind of mentioned the Book of Mormon. Like it's been proven, no, Native Americans aren't Israelites. You know, like the whole Book of Mormon narrative is kind of sketchy anyway, because like it's these gold plates that it was supposedly written on. And after Joseph Smith translated it, it was convenient that, you know, the angel took the gold plates back. We don't have them today. No one can translate them to get it today. Joseph Smith, using his prophetic powers, supposedly translated this ancient Egyptian papyrus and said, oh, these are writings of the patriarch Abraham when he was in Egypt. And as luck would have it for Joseph Smith, that papyrus burned up in the Great Chicago Fire. It was in a museum in Chicago. However, years later, people found fragments of the papyrus. Remember, the Rosetta Stone was in like 1850 or something. And so like when Joseph Smith was doing this, no one could translate Egyptian. But now we have these fragments of the papyrus. They're like, this isn't Abraham. This is just a common funeral death scroll about preparing a body for the afterlife that the Egyptians always have. You know, there's even pictures of like the canopic jars under a body being prepared as a mummy. And he says, well, this is Abraham being sacrificed by an idolatrous priest. And we're like, well, no, Egyptologists today say, no, this is very clearly just a picture of someone being prepared for mummification. And so like thing after thing after thing. And I knew, the crazy thing is, like, even before I went on my mission when I was 18, I knew about this stuff, but like there were apologetic, I don't know if you're familiar with like the branch of they call it like apologetics or apologists. Like you have those in Christianity too. So basically an apologist is someone in religion who can logically make an argument against like a secular argument, right? So like an atheist would, like, even with the Bible, there's biblical apologists who say, well, yeah, sure, you know, you have us here, but using this logic, it's still true. So there's tons of Mormon apologists. So there's like logical answers to these questions, but eventually, like, you start looking at the logic, you know, like to you, probably because you weren't born in Mormonism, you probably hear like gold plates and angels taking it away and translating Egyptian, and you're like, what the heck? Like, this is so weird. But like growing up in it, you're like, oh, okay. And then like, it just takes a while to sort of like deprogram your brain to like look at it objectively and be like, whoa, wait a minute. Like this is a little weird. And then, like if it's true, then great. But like, you have to think deeply about it and be like, well, do I really think this is true? And after a while, I just came to the conclusion I didn't.
That makes sense. And then, is there like even so? But I imagine that the core belief systems and stuff still work. So like, having like many kids is probably something that you're probably keen on. I mean, many people want kids, so like it's not like that big of a difference. I think it's just more like the population size. How do you like? And this is like not like a personal question. Like, I don't want to like know your bank statements, but I'm just kind of curious because like everyone has so many kids. Like, how do people afford all the kids?
Yeah. So that's a good question. That culture is shifting a little bit. I definitely grew up still in the many kid culture. And, I think that's a byproduct of a couple things. Like I said, early Mormons were polygamists. For the record, like Mormons haven't been polygamous. Well, the main branch of Mormonism haven't been polygamous. You can still see like the sister wives on HBO and stuff. Like
Yeah.
those are the fundamentalists, and they've held on to that. But for like more than 100 years, I think it's like 130 years, Mormons haven't been polygamists. But one of the ideas of polygamy was probably to try to have more kids. Even though that's, kind of a screwed up justification for that. But so I think that's one of the byproducts. Also, like Mormons are pretty conservative type Christians, just like you would see with a Catholic, back in the day, that like, you're not expected to have birth control. You're expected to just, basically if you're having sex, it's to make children. That was kind of Mormonism for a while too. That wasn't the case so much when I came around, but there still is a huge importance on family, even large families. And I still know people in Utah who have large families. I don't have a large family personally. I have 2 kids, and there's a good chance that's probably where I'm going to stop. But you never know. But I was the youngest of 6. So like, yeah, I had a big family. My dad wasn't, exceptionally wealthy, my parents weren't exceptionally wealthy. My mom didn't work. She was a stay-at-home mom. And honestly, when I was a kid, like I have very vague memories of my dad, and it's my dad's a great guy. I have lots of respect for him, but when I was a kid, because there were 6 kids in the house still, like I think he was working 2 or 3 jobs, try to support 6 kids. And so, yeah, I mean, there are some who are successful and wealthy and can make that work, but there's also some that it's a struggle. But I think it's a struggle they're willing to have, and I mean, I agree with that. If people have kids, I think having kids are great. It's not for everybody. Obviously, as a human race, like it has to happen, or we're gonna go extinct, or our economies will go upside down, or whatever. But like, yeah, I think it's a good thing. I think it's a worthy cause. But I personally, I would rather have less kids, be able to give them what they need, give them the attention they need, than have 6 to 10 kids or something. I don't envy the Mormon parents that end up having a whole little clan.
Yeah, I used to think it'd be fun to have like 20 kids and then have like a town and have like a town. I just call it Lolton, just like a ton of lols. But it's like, that's a lot of time and attention, or else they'll like turn feral and start attacking me or something. They need direction and stuff, or else it doesn't go well.
Yeah. You if you're actually interested in that, you should check out some of the fundamentalist Mormon communities, and you can have multiple wives too while you're at it.
I don't think my wife would like that. I feel like there'd be some competition.
I don't think most do. I don't think most do.
It feels like a bad. I mean, it feels like a bad rap for everybody because, like, I mean, how? I'm not saying it's difficult, like to, have only one partner, but at the same time, it's like imagine multiplying the complexity of partners. It's like one wife seems like enough to fill my cup. So if I had like multiple, it's like, well, my cup's just like overflowing, and I'm starting to like twitch a lot when I go out in public or something. It's like where do I go to relax? Like I'm just getting badgered the second I come home or something. I don't know. It just sounds like for the guy, it doesn't sound like all that fun, and then from the women, I don't know if that sounds all that fun either.
Yeah. Polygamy definitely has some issues with it, especially you see it especially in the fundamentalist Mormons today, but you see it in church history too, especially when there's like young girls involved and like coercion involved. Like that's obviously jacked up. But even if it's consenting adults that do it, I just don't think it works out because, yeah, like personally, I don't have the emotional energy to have multiple wives. And yeah, then there's the jealousy, and rightly so, the jealousy of having multiple wives. You know, these fundamentalists like communities, like if you look up, for whatever reason, people are like fascinated with it now. So like you have, you know, like the sister wives. There's a documentary on Warren Jeffs, that's a gross documentary because Warren Jeffs is just a pervert. And
Is he the guy?
He's
I
in jail
remember
now.
seeing. Remember seeing one where they're following a couple of Mormon families, and apparently, like the women pick out the next wife, and they were like talking about how like sometimes they find the implication was that sometimes they find young women, and the guy looked in the camera was like sometimes you just have to be patient, and like there's like little girls running around. It's like, oh, the camera people are clearly like, you know, whatever. But I was like, oh my god, I don't know which one that was.
I don't know if
But
that
like,
was him. He was married, so he was the leader of the fundamentalist sect, and yeah, he was married to like 11 and 12-year-old girls, and like it's gross because like he's in jail for child rape, and so you know hopefully he rots in jail, and then the prison rots on him because yeah, those type of people don't deserve to be in our society, but so yeah, that's gross. But like there are lots of documentaries about fundamentalist Mormons and polygamists because I think like I don't know whether it's just like our culture of just like loving the shock factor, but like people are fascinated by it. And there's even like if you look at the sister wives, I can't remember their names. They sort of make it work. And like, you know,
yeah.
the sister wives kind of work together. They're kind of raising the kids together. And it's like, well, maybe that works. Like it's not normal or like what we tend to resonate with in society, but it's like if they make it work, I mean I'm kind of libertarian in nature, so I'm like, well, if it's consenting adults and like they're making it work, like sure. You know.
Yeah. I feel like from just the population statistics, there's more men than women. So then, like, how does that work out? There's like a bunch of like lonely Mormons that sit in the corner just like being jealous.
Well, the fundamentalists actually they like will outcast their teenage boys sometimes because yeah,
Oh,
they have to and they'll
just like
send them to like
lions.
ranches and stuff. Yeah, they'll because I mean, yeah, they gotta yeah, exactly like lions. They've you know, the old senior men have to make room for all their future wives.
Yeah. I think that, I don't know if this is a true story anymore, but there's this like Freud proposed this idea of a primal father. So like in the olden days, there was like one person he had to have sex with all the women. So then the rest of the guys were like, well, this sucks. So then they killed him and ate him. So they would have the ability to have sex with multiple people. So it sounds like in these fundamentalist societies, they should take, you know, some of their dads to like a cliff face and be like, oh no, he slipped. What happened?
Yeah, you would think if they rose up together, they could
Yeah.
make something work, right? Yeah, I don't
Yeah, they just
I
like
don't
push
know.
them off, and then it's like, oh, a bunch of widows are now on the market. You know, I
Yeah.
don't know. Maybe the
Well,
wives should be in on it too.
I think there's something to be said about that because like um you know these and I'm not going to hesitate with the fundamentalists because I think they are very cult like these cults like if everybody rose up against them they'd be powerless, right? But there's a certain degree of like mind control and authority and fear that's get struck into their believers, and so yeah, it kind of paralyzes them. But yeah, I think you're exactly right. There's enough people who could rise up against the power systems that it shouldn't work, but once you know you get the psychology involved in it for whatever reason it does.
Yeah. How did your I don't think the entirety of your social network knows that you're transitioning out. Though the podcast is kind of a giveaway at a certain point. How are they responding to it?
Yeah, so you and I talked about this a little bit on email. So I only go by my first name. Tom isn't a pseudonym. It is my first name. I don't use my last name when I podcast. And it's not because I'm doing anything secret. I mean, technically, if I speak out against the church, I could receive some discipline from the church. And what that could look like is either like being excommunicated from the church or something. But like that's as bad as it could get, right? But the main reason I don't use my full name is just in case like someone happens to be Googling my full name and they come across me that's like my family members that don't know about it. So there is like some social backlash. Most of actually all of my immediate family, so like siblings, parents, my in-laws, they all know. And in fact, many of my siblings actually left the church before I did. But my full believing and active members of my family, eventually they're going to find out about it. I'm kind of just putting off the inevitable. And I'd rather, be the one that tells them rather than them happen across it and be like, oh my goodness, Tom's podcasting and going public about his gripes with the church. And I don't know. Like I say, I'm probably just putting off the inevitable. And then there's certain people that it's like, you know what, like, and I don't mean this disrespectful to my extended family, but it's like, there's certain people like aunts, uncles, even my grandma. It's like, I don't know if they need to know. And it's like, it would probably do more harm than good to find out that, I'm on my way out. And like I say, like, it's not my MO to try to convince people, but yeah, Mormonism, there is social backlash. It's not as bad as like the Amish or like Scientology. Like Amish people, if they choose not to live the Amish life, I think they basically get shunned depending on the level of strictness in the Amish community. I haven't gotten shunned, but my relationships have definitely changed, and especially like, yeah, people are, and it makes people sad. And they think, cause if you believe the religion, like your eternal salvation is on the line. Right. So like, it comes out of a place of love, but it's definitely culturally, like, it's different, especially in Utah, where like you're surrounded by active Mormons. If you go down to Salt Lake, I think the majority is non-Mormon now. I mean, it didn't used to be that way, but the majority is non-Mormon now. It's a bunch of heathens in Salt Lake City. No, I'm just kidding. But outside in the more suburban or rural areas, you're still predominantly surrounded by Mormons.
Do the Mormons have so for Amish they have some of them have this thing called Rumspringer where like for a couple of years they can go run around and they come back, so they have a sense of like what the world looks like. Is there a Mormon equivalent of that for these things where like they say, hey, you can go out and like try stuff, so like this is what you want, or is they just kind of expect you to always be in the groove?
No, and Mormons are very much like, like Jesus in the New Testament says, be in the world but not of the world. So that would be kind of the Mormon way. Like you don't have your own communities. We don't dress different. We probably talk different, and act different. There's not a formal thing. I would say a lot of LDS, Mormon kids do get that when they go to college, even at BYU. Like BYU is an LDS school, but like from what I've heard, fortunately, I didn't go to BYU. I'm not a BYU fan. But like,
what's wrong with it?
I just don't like the athletics personally, but
okay, so it's like a sports thing.
Yeah, there's some rivalries in the state with football and stuff. But anyway, also I have a problem with the cultural aspects, but that's a whole different conversation. But even at BYU, a church-run school, like you can still find partying and people having sex and drinking and drugs and stuff. It's probably not quite to the same degree. So I would just say like there's not a formal go out and live in the world, but there's like, it happens, it definitely informally happens, just like anybody, right? Like even if someone has kind of conservative Christian parents, they go off to college and they maybe start drinking or start going to parties and stuff. So yeah, just kind of the same type of thing.
Mm-hmm. I could see a TV show called The Alternative Mormons with an S. And it's like you and your brothers, and then like some that are still in it, and just like how you guys all work together to like, still have some type of thing going on. I think that'd go well, like as a TV show. Like the first episode is just like you like breaking the news, and then like the rest of the season is just like the ramifications of this. As like everyone like your brothers get followed, your parents get followed and stuff. But at the same time, why would you want to do that unless they pay you a lot of money? So hopefully,
yeah. I mean, maybe. So you're saying maybe I should reach out to like HBO or somebody and see if they're.
I mean, depending on you can probably like kickstart it yourself or do like a crowdsourcing or something. I mean, how much equipment do you really need? How many people do you really need? And you have enough siblings that are you could probably like give them like $10 and be like, hold this camera for a minute or something.
There you go.
You could probably like jerry rig it yourself. I think
go viral on YouTube.
Yeah, or TikTok, but I'm hoping TikTok gets banned. I don't know how you feel about that, but I'm on. I get comments now that I keep making comments about it. Like like people write me, it's like, why do you want TikTok to be banned? It's like that.
Because
like,
they're Chinese spies. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like they're watching everything. There's a person who was saying that there was like Chinese cameras or something, like some type of like infrastructure system that's put across the Midwest, and they know where the nuclear things are because they're not allowed to move the camera more this way. Like they can't like
Hmm.
bevel it to this one area, so they have like a sense where they are. But like nothing stops them from just like moving the camera. Like
Well,
if they were like,
plus we had a balloon go over our whole country, right? So
yeah, I don't know what that's about. I don't know if like who cares? Is it a balloon? Or, I mean, like they have satellites. Like they don't need a balloon. Like
yeah, well,
balloons kind of stupid.
I have a theory on that. I know
Sure,
this is totally unrelated. We're getting off topic, but
it's all good.
it seems to me that that was a test, a little bit of China saying, "Well, I wonder what happens if we invade their airspace, if they'll shoot us down immediately." Which, in my opinion, I think we failed that test. I think China now thinks they can invade our airspace. So I have issues with how it was handled. But this isn't. We're not necessarily talking politics. We can if you want. I love politics too. So,
Yeah.
but
No, we can go in that direction. I think people have we can go anywhere, whatever interests us. But yeah, I don't know. The nice thing about America is we have two giant moats called the Pacific and Atlantic Ocean. So like no
sure,
one's really gonna mess with us. We have a giant navy, so no one really can mess with us. Globalization's kind of built on the back of Americans, which people bitch about, but overall, like more people are out of poverty because of globalization.
yeah,
Like there's depending on the next 10 years go, like there might not be anyone who goes hungry in America, like in the world, which might be
yeah. I think
really
that'd be awesome.
that'd be pretty cool. Yeah, and versus like pre World War II, where the British were like the superpower, they built everything so that everything would just like flow to them. But like
Hmm.
America, we guard the infrastructure, like the trade routes. But if China wants to trade with Japan using the safety of the waters that we've projected, like we're fine with that.
Yeah.
But then I'm sure we have like some pretty good deals, off the back of that as well.
Yeah, America is interesting because we got like the nuclear bomb. We got the biggest stick, and we were the
Hmm.
first person not to use it. I mean, we did use it, obviously, but we could have used it for global domination pretty easily, in my
Yeah,
opinion. And
we
instead,
didn't
we
want
used
to,
it to
which is weird.
promote world peace, which is that's probably controversial because some people would say, well, no, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that's not really world peace. But if you look at the opposite of what could have happened, I would argue it did bring world peace. So
Yeah, I think wasn't like projected like a million soldiers would die
yeah,
in like the
yeah,
first week, not
right,
including like all the civilians and stuff that were just gonna die.
right. Which
So like
obviously, like,
there's
there's
some
moral implications, right? Do you play God and take that out of the hands by killing innocent civilians? I think we've learned a lot from that. But no, speaking of giant moats, I think we did have the moats until we started making ICBMs, and now they're making hypersonic ICBMs, which is kind of terrifying because how do you shoot something that's going faster than the speed of sound that's heading towards your country? But I'm not a military expert. I'm just a Mormon, So,
yeah,
but if you start talking politics with me, I'm kind of a nerd about that kind of stuff too. So I'll start going off. But anyway, I apologize.
sure. No, it's all good. I instigated it. What do you think about private prisons? I personally hate them, and I don't know why they exist.
A private what?
Private prisons.
Prisons. Oh, sorry. I thought you said presidents at first. Um, I actually haven't thought much about private prisons. I think at a minimum, our justice system sucks. I think it needs a lot of work. You know, as a self-identifying libertarian, I think there's too many people going to prison for victimless crimes. Possession of marijuana, stuff like that.
Yeah, we should
Especially.
just tax it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I agree. I think legalize it, tax it, um, and especially when the people who are harmed by the victimless crimes tend to be predominantly non-white people. That is problematic, and to pretend like the justice system is perfect is wrong. Now, is our justice system better than a lot of countries? Yes. Look at Russia. Look at North Korea. Look at the Islamic states in the Middle East. Like, yeah, our justice system's a lot better, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have room to improve.
Hmm.
But I haven't thought a lot about private prisons. Why do you think they're such a bad idea?
Um, they they tend to just be very they cut as many costs as possible. And I think fundamentally, our prison system was meant to be like, hey, we help people get back on track. Like you get punished for what you did, but you get back on track.
Right.
And at a certain point, it just became about punishing people. And then private prisons just, I think there's a lot more suffering that happens in them. because they're trying to cut costs as much as possible and make as much money. Like there's people that will like have illnesses and stuff, and they'll just like kind of like kick the can until you're out of the prison,
Yeah.
and now it's an even bigger problem. But now you have to take care of it yourself, so you have to find insurance, and now you have a pre-existing condition. So it's like if the idea is to get people from a state of not doing right things to doing right things, uh, it just kind of like takes from them to such an extent that they can't stand on their feet when they're out. And prisons themselves, like it's not like we have a great transition system as it is, but it just seems like there's a lot more abuse that happens in private prisons than public prisons. At the same time, I'm going to be talking to someone from Rikers Island, so I'll be I can ask like specifically like what are the differences. But from the outside, it seems that like profit designed from how many people you have in your prison probably doesn't work very well to getting people to not come back to prison. There's been a couple of cases where like judges and some I think private prisons were like working on a deal where the judge was sending more than was required, so that and then the judge would get a kickback and stuff. I think it's a wrong incentive system.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And I think it is funny to me because like you know, some people, especially like Republicans, push back on socialism, which is fine. But like I'm like, you do realize like we're already socialists in a lot of ways, you know, like our prison system, our roads, utilities. Yeah. You know, like when you look at utilities, like the only thing we have that's not public is like electricity, at least in Utah. You know, we have private electricity and private natural gas. Everything else is public. It's you know, water systems, sewer systems, roads, and I'm a civil engineer by profession, so that's why I'm talking about utilities. But so yeah, it's, you know, obviously like we as a people decided, okay, schools, we still have private schools, we still believe in school choice, but for the most part, everybody goes to public schools. You know, roads, we decided we don't want private toll roads everywhere. And so it's like we are socialized in certain aspects. So it's like it's just it's a question of what's the degree of socialism that we want. And that's why I do identify myself as a libertarian, but I'm not like a full blown libertarian that I think like schools should be all private, roads should be all private, you know, no restraints on the free market. The reason I'm a libertarian is I just think the government's gone out of hand. I think it's gotten too big. And so I think we should scale it back. If the government started to scale it back, I would probably no longer be a libertarian, because I'd say, okay, we've gone far enough. You know, it's just this small government mindset that, okay, let's let the free market work itself out a little bit more. Let's, you know, not let the government's really, in my mind, the government's there to enforce the rules. The government's there to make sure you know, fundamental freedoms are protected, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. But beyond that, the government they should be a rule or a referee. They shouldn't be a player in the game is kind of how I see it. So,
So I imagine Thomas Jefferson is like one of your favorite presidents then.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. What are your other, like, if you had like 5 that you like the most?
Oh, that's a hard question. None of the last few, because that's the opposite.
Discounting it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at the executive orders, I don't know if you've seen those graphs of like the executive orders. Like it started going up with George W. Bush, Obama, it just went crazy. And then Donald Trump was like, phew, and now Biden, it's like the minute, I think it was like the first day he was in, he had like 48 executive orders or something like that. And it's like, yeah, the president was not intended to be that powerful, you know, if you read the early documentation. So that's a hard question. I like a lot of the, you know, founding father presidents, and Thomas Jefferson's definitely one of the best. I agree.
Yeah.
I don't know if I could pick 5, but that's a good question.
That's all good. I'm reading biographies on every president. So like,
are you?
That's why I ask. Yeah. I'm up to Polk, but I cheat as well because I've already read FDR. I've read the Roosevelts. I've read LBJ, like everything from like the 1900s to the 1960s. I already did this. So what's
your opinion on FDR? I'm curious.
I mean, I used to like him in concept because I think he did some interesting things. I think the New Deal is like, there's a lot of really great things there. I don't like the ditch digging and then filling it. Like there's if you look at like the things that were built from that stuff, like most post offices were built with those types of grants, which I think is really great. So built out the infrastructure for like success to happen. So I thought it was really good. So I thought I'd like him more as I read more about him. But then when I read more about him, I ended up liking his wife more, Eleanor. I thought like I went in
Hmm.
thinking like, oh, Eleanor, like people like what did she do? I don't know. Which maybe is offensive to some people, but like I didn't know anything about her. I went in and I thought by then it was like, wow, FDR is kind of a piece of shit, and Eleanor knows what's up. Like FDR had this thing where he'd surround himself with pretty decent people, but then at certain points he would be like, I'm gonna work on something secret, and I'm gonna whip it out and whack people in the face with it. And he's like, why aren't people liking it? Like he had so much capacity to do even more than what he was intending to do if he just like learned to play with other people nicely. Like
Yeah.
it really went to his head. And I think some of the things that kept him grounded was his wife. So I kind of got changed a little bit in terms of thinking he was like more of an interesting guy. If you were to ask me which is my favorite Roosevelt, Teddy by
Oh
by
yeah, Teddy
a
Roosevelt's
mile
cool.
is way more interesting. I like some of the things he did. I think he did a good job with like the war effort, mobilizing it. But at the same time, I think he was pretty good at recognizing talent. Like not Douglas MacArthur, Marshall, the guy who was like the chief of staff for the whole war effort. He was just like one colonel when he first met uh, FDR, but the FDR was like, "Oh, that's the guy to put in charge," because everyone else was basically having a World War One mindset of like entrenchment, all this bullshit. And he was the only one who was saying like, "No, we can't throw that out because Germany
Yeah.
isn't playing by that rule book anymore. We can't do that. Combine arms, all these other things." So he's good at putting people in good places, but sometimes he ignored them, which was not
Yeah.
great. But that's my opinion. I think the New Deal stuff, I think it had a great deal of potential. The problem is that it went towards people who my thing with it is that it went towards people who knew how to lobby and get stuff done. And so like, which is a good thing, right? You want things to go to the people who know what to do with it. The problem at the time was it was basically New York City. So New York City went from like Chicago to being like this massive thing because they had Rob Moses in there who knew how to take money and build it into projects, bridges, highways, all these different things. He knew how to translate it. Where everywhere else that really could have used that stuff didn't really know how to do that. So like I think it was like 67% of all that type of money that was put out there just went to New York City.
Yeah.
I would
And
like to see other places.
yeah, I have a little bit of experience in my profession dealing with federal grants and stuff like
Mhm.
that too. And yeah, there tends to be a lot of fat, a lot of bloating,
Yeah.
and there's people who profit extremely handsomely off government grants and knowing how to work the system. And yeah, I just asked because FDR is probably one of my least favorite presidents because he instituted the Federal Reserve, right?
I
As
think
well.
so.
So yeah, he really changed our economics a lot, and yeah, it was very much the Keynesian economics of throw money in the system and make inflation happen and make it grow. And obviously it worked in the New Deal, but there's questions of the ramifications are worth it, like you're talking about. So yeah,
Yeah. You'd wanted to have a gold standard? Want to go back to gold and silver?
I like the idea of it. I think it's too late now.
Mm.
Um, but yeah,
There's not enough minerals.
I just think we've gone so far from it. How do you reverse that?
It'd be a
Um,
giant depression
oh
for
yeah,
like maybe even a century.
right. I mean, we rely on the inflationary periods, right? If you go to Econ 101, which is about as broad as my economics knowledge is, but you have those inflation recession graphs that you always see in basic economics classes, and it's like we rely on both the dips and the up. So yeah, I don't know how you would do it nowadays, but yeah, definitely was a change. And if you look at our inflation today, and then especially in Utah, I don't know if you're feeling this where you live, but like our house prices were going nuts for a year after the pandemic. And like I said,
And then they're crashing.
yeah, and I'm in engineering, so like I also saw like construction prices, like material prices were going crazy, and supply times were awful. And then the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell decided, oh, I should probably do something, and it was like so reactionary. They start reacting by changing the inflation or the interest rates, and it's like it. The problem I have with the Federal Reserve is I just think people are inherently fallible. And so as soon as you put that much power in a chair or in a group of people, the Fed, then there's just so much they have their hands on the controls of the economy, and it's a little alarming. I think they're probably doing okay, probably better than I would be doing, I'm sure. but yeah, I like the free market principles of it just working out. And I think the inflationary period that happened was because of people, and I think now we're heading towards a recession, and that's probably because of people. And so, maybe if we were a little more proactive rather than reactive, we wouldn't be feeling that. But we feel it a lot in Utah. House prices went crazy, and now interest rates have gone up, and now they're just kind of flatlining. So.
Yeah, on one hand, that doesn't sound good for anyone who's looking for a house or bought a house. On the other hand, sounds like there's gonna be a bunch of great deals coming up the next year.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah, but I think sometimes, like, what would I do if I was when I critique a system, I think, what would I do if I was in charge? Like, what would I do if I was like conceptually, one of the leaders of the Mormon Church, for example? But if I was like the president of the United States, what would I do if I was coming in? If I was Joe Biden and I really didn't like what Trump was doing or whatever, and I wanted to like get a lot done, I would have like, as soon as I was confirmed as president, that entire time I'd have people just drafting executive orders. And the second my hand left the Bible, you just see like 20 aides run down and just go, and like everyone's like freaking out, like what is Lowell doing? What is Lowell doing? It's like within like 10 minutes, like I've just like recreated everything in my image.
Well, that's funny, right? Because like that's exactly what happened with the last two presidents. Like Trump's first executive orders were just reneging on everything Obama did. And then Biden did the exact same thing. So it's kind of funny because their first executive orders aren't really accomplishing anything. They're just saying, oh, we don't want to do this. Like, like Trump, one of Trump's first things was getting out of the Paris Climate Treaty.
Yeah.
And
the Iran deal.
Yeah. And the Iran deal.
I like that deal. I thought it was good.
I haven't read enough into it. Yeah. But then like, I can't remember what Biden reversed, but Biden reversed a bunch of stuff within his first day too. So it kind of makes me laugh because like, these presidents think they have all this power, and then it's like, well, your last 40 years just got erased with a bunch of executive orders. But I don't know. It is funny. And, but anyway, long story short, I think corruption and fallibility are just inherent to people, and especially when they get power. And so for me, I think the best government system, I think we do have the best government system. I think it has room for improvement. But checks and balances, multiple people looking at the same thing. I don't think presidents should be able to make acts of war, like when we shoot down drones or shoot down. But then that gets complicated once you get into nuclear type war, right? But I do think like there should be more checks and balances, but that the government should also have its hands in less things. I think we would all be happier, but that's my personal opinion.
Yeah, I was reading, just in terms of continuity of government, that Trump and Biden have like some of the most consistent policy. Like Trump was more like loud in how he said things. He'd be like, I'm going to pull out of this, but then he would kind of like move on. He wouldn't put people in place to do it. But in terms of Biden, he's not only just saying things, but he's actually putting in bureaucrats and stuff to implement the system. Like you were talking about like hyperballistic or hypersonic nuclear missiles, and like we basically like crippled China's Chinese chip manufacturing. Like within a day, you either had to renounce your citizenship or get back to America. You're no longer doing any work in China for these chips. But like from what I've been reading is that and people, anyone more smart than me, which should be a lot of people, just write in and tell me if I'm wrong. But like Trump started like this hey, China's doing some bad stuff, especially with business. They were like just ripping off everyone's stuff, and then Biden's come in and just ripped out their entire chip manufacturing. So they sent them back to basically the Stone Age. Like their chips suck, and so like a lot of the technology, a lot of the people that would want to fire a missile at America don't have like the chip potential to actually fire a chip at America.
Oh, that's good.
That's what it sounds like to me. Like there's a lot of stuff like that's going on, which I generally enjoy, because it's like if China's just like stealing everyone's stuff essentially in America, and they don't have any weapons for it, and then there was like a trade war that kind of happened, but kind of didn't happen. And then Biden came in. I thought that was great. Like that was such a smart move, in my opinion. I don't pay attention to everything, but I was reading about this where it's like,
I haven't read
like
into
within
that.
24 hours, every person from America who was working on chip manufacturing in China had to come home or renounce their citizenship. Like that's crazy. Like just like in a day, destroyed everything.
Yeah. Well, I don't doubt that. I'm not the biggest. I don't profess to be the biggest Trump fan, and I do think it's cool. What's that?
I just thought it was cool. It's like, wow, in a
Oh
day,
no,
like
that is
how often
cool.
do you like just destroy an entire like
Yeah,
an
if
entire
that's true, that's cool.
pillar? Yeah, I'd recommend
Yeah,
checking it out. Like
yeah, I'll
it's
have to
probably the
read in on
smartest
that.
thing I've seen. I haven't seen something as smart and as deft as that in a very long time. I don't know if like Biden did it or like just like he had like a really smart aide who did it or something. But it was like, wow, that was pretty cool. That's like masterful. Like they
Well,
identified the one thing that underpinned the entire system, and they went,
yeah, yeah. No, that is interesting. That is interesting. Yeah.
yeah. If anyone knows more about this, you can write in and tell me I'm stupid. But I
Yeah,
thought that was
same
pretty
same
cool.
with me. I'm a hobby politician or politics follower, and I have my own opinions, and I'm sure they can be disproven. But
Yeah, that's the fun part.
I'm
As long as
still
people can talk
outspoken.
about
Even
them.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
No, that is circling back to my podcast. That is the
yeah,
biggest reason I decided to podcast is like in politics and religion, right? When I used to knock on doors when I was a missionary, people would always say, "Oh, you're breaking the rules. There's two things you're not supposed to talk about. You're not supposed to talk about politics. You're not supposed to talk about religion." And I think that's fundamentally like a true part of our culture, and I think that's bad because like the way we make progress as a people is by talking, right? And so it's like um, I don't like the idea like, oh, well, you decided to leave the Mormon faith, you shouldn't talk about it, or oh, you're a conservative, you shouldn't talk about it, or you know, or a conservative saying the same thing towards a liberal. Oh, you're a liberal, I don't want to hear it. It's like I just don't think that's a healthy attitude, and that's I went back and forth a lot on starting a podcast, and that's why I started is because like these are uncomfortable conversations, but I'm someone who's willing to have them because I don't shy away from uncomfortable conversations. Maybe I'm just a personality that I'm obnoxious and I'm willing to like talk about stuff, but like I think that's super important, right? Is like listening and reading and talking to people you don't agree with. Like I talk to people all the time I don't agree with, and I've just noticed a lot of times people will shut down, you know, oh, you think differently than me, oh, I can't talk to you. And it's like then people just build these little echo chambers, and I think that's where the polarization politically, culturally, religiously in our culture happens is we don't want to talk to somebody on the other side of the fence, and we just get in our echo chambers and we get stuck in our way of thinking. And I like to be open-minded. I like to say, you know, I could be wrong about everything, about religion, about politics. I've changed my mind on tons of things throughout my life. And so it's like, why not just be open and be willing to talk to someone you disagree with?
yeah.
And
It's fun.
disagree without being disagreeable, right? Like I can
Yeah,
disagree with someone on very important things, but like at the end of the day, they're still a person. And so at the end of the day, I can shake their hand and say, you know, I disagree with you, but oh well.
yeah. I think it's fun. I wish more people did it. I think it's more like people don't talk like on Twitter or whatever, and then like they think what's on the news is reflective of society.
Yeah.
Like I don't pay attention to the news. Like more often than not, if like something comes through to me that's news related, I usually figure out like how it got to me, and then either I add a filter so I don't see it again,
Right.
or I tweak my filters to only let things in that I find interesting. Like I don't need to see the horrible like the world is portrayed to be like this very dangerous place. It's the safest it's ever been. Like
Well, it's
it's a
because that
really good time to
sells,
be
right?
alive. Yeah, it's
It's
so like I want to be a part of it because I know very many smart people who who just like let them be ruled by someone making $20 an hour and not liking their job either, and they'll just sit there and be like, oh, Trump's gonna take back the president, and blah, blah, blah. It's like no one's gonna let him do that. Chill out. Like
yeah.
it's not gonna happen. If he does, like he'll get clapped in like 3 days. Like stop it. Like it's not gonna happen. Like
Yeah.
but it's just it's sad how often like you only have so much mental energy in your day. So if you're like artificially having like these mental wars with people, like you're not even fighting anyone. You're fighting an idea that was presented to you that like to some extent represents other people's ideas. But like
Hmm.
walk down the street, say hi to your neighbor. Go talk to your neighbor in a nice way. I think that's more fun. And at the same time, disagree. Like if someone fundamentally disagrees with me, I think it's a fun conversation. I've been in friend groups where like I was disagreeing with someone, and we were having like really fun exchange, and like but their significant other literally started being like, hey, you need to stop this, because I'm like the guest. And I was like, no, it's fine. Like I'm not offended.
Yeah.
Or like it's sad, especially in the workplace. There's a back when I used to work for people and didn't do my own thing. There'd be times where I'd have a disagreement with someone, or like someone had a disagreement with me, and we just would like they would start yelling because people aren't used to having disagreements in a level way.
Yeah.
And I would just sit there and I would just be like, all right, and all right, and so this is the thing that you think. All right, so this is what you're saying, like just like make sure they're being heard and stuff. And the next day they'd be like, yeah, I was about to step in, but you seem pretty chill about the guy yelling in your face. Like, I don't know, he's being the baby.
Yeah,
Like he's doing this in front of
an
everybody. Like,
emotionally mature thing to do, right?
yeah, I mean, he's the supervisor, but he's yelling at me. Like I'm winning this argument. But it just doesn't bother me. But and there's like tons of stuff that we disagree on. I think if we were to like talk about Thomas Jefferson, we probably disagree because I don't like that guy. But
Yeah.
like we would have, like, we'd be like, I think we'd be chill about it.
Yeah.
I am, so I have like two questions, and I think we can wrap up. I'm curious, like, what do you think heaven is like? Like, not just like from a scripture standpoint, but when you imagine it, it sounds like you do believe in it. So then, when you die and you're in heaven, what do you think the experience will be like?
Man, that's such a hard question, especially where like I'm more agnostic today.
Mm.
I'll tell you I'll tell you what Mormons believe, and then I'll tell you what parts of that I believe in. So Mormons believe, if you make it, first of all, there's different levels of heaven, and I won't get into all of the theology of that, but if you get to what they call the celestial kingdom, the idea is that you're together with your family forever. You're in the presence of God. And the idea, they call it eternal progression. So like throughout, like think of our lives, like every day you learn something new, you grow in some way. The idea is that through eternities, you continue to grow, you continue to learn until eventually you know everything. And that's why Mormons get made fun of, like, oh, you guys believe you're going to be gods and have your own planet and stuff. That's actually kind of true in Mormon theology. Is the idea is that, if we are the same way we are today, where we learn and grow, eventually, if you apply eternity to that equation, yeah, you'll know how to do everything, right? And so that's kind of a cool part of Mormon doctrine. Like a lot of people make fun of that because they're like, oh, well, that's impossible. But it's like, look, like it's a theology, right? You can believe what you want. And I kind of would disagree with people who mock people's beliefs anyway, because at the end of the day, if you're religious, I could find something in pretty much every religion that's kind of kooky and out there. So that's what Mormons believe. The thing that I have a hard time with is in Mormonism, the idea is unless you follow the rules and do exactly, then you're not going to fit in this group where you're with your family forever. And I kind of joke that that's like the Mormon mafia, like do what you say, or it'd be a shame if you didn't have your family,
Yeah.
And so I think that's kind of jacked up. If God, if God is real and he's a loving God, I have a hard time believing that he's going to be separating families. And so I like to believe that if there's an afterlife, that I'm with my family. But because I have this agnostic belief, like I'm not counting on that. Like it could happen, it could not happen. I don't know. And so I'm trying to apply that and just live in the present. I think that's probably one of the biggest blessings or biggest benefits to having gone through this faith crisis and faith transition is like I don't count on anything in the next life anymore. Like if it happens, great. And I'm going to try to live my life, be a good person, help others, pray to God. That's about it. If this is the only life, I want to make sure I live a life that's, if I only get my 80, 100 years, whatever, I better take advantage of it, right? If not, oh, well, I took advantage of it. I was a good person. I'm not going to be a selfish bastard that just does whatever I want. But I do, I hope there's an afterlife. I think that'd be great, but I don't know exactly what it looks like. I guess we'll find out. I don't believe in if you get one thing wrong, you're going to burn an eternity in hell. I don't think that matches the God I believe in.
Yeah, there's a video of this little boy who's going up to the Pope, and he's crying, and so the Pope's like, "Hey, lean into my ear and tell me what's wrong," and he's like speaking in Italian, so I don't know what he's doing. But then like the Pope's translating, and the Pope's like, "Hey, do you mind if I tell your story?" And the kid's like, "Yeah, all right." He's like, "Okay, well, you sit here with me while I tell everyone what you just said." And so the boy's crying because his father died, but he wasn't baptized and he didn't believe in God, and so he's like, "Is my dad in hell?" And so the Pope was like, "Well, was your dad a good dad? Was he a good man?" And then his son was like, "He was the best man, like best dad in the world." And then the Pope was like, "I don't think God would let someone that like that so far from him. like he wouldn't let someone like that be far from him, even if
Yeah.
he didn't believe. And it's like, oh, that was so sweet to like say that to the little boy. And I mean, it was to the crowd as well. So like, I mean, if the Pope's saying it, it's kind of nice. Like this, like some popes are like the Borgias were not good popes, but like it's nice to hear like. I think that concept makes sense to me as well. It's like if you're just a good person, like there's like a good person like China, they've never heard about Christianity. Christianity, let's say, is the right one. Like it seems kind of unfair. You're just born on the wrong side of the planet. You don't get to be brought in. Like it's just unfair. So I think
Yeah.
I like to believe like if there is that system in existence, that it would work out that way.
Yeah, I think so too. Now, to Mormonism's credit, they have a really interesting theology on that. They do ordinances for those who didn't choose to take them in this life, and they call them like baptisms for the dead. And I used to get asked about this a lot on my mission because it sounds like kind of gross and creepy. Like, oh, are you baptizing dead people? Like it's not what they believe. They believe that like they do believe that you are required to receive certain rituals in this life. One of them being, like baptism. But they say, okay, like if you're this kid in China that never even knew who Jesus was, and you were a good person, we're going to baptize you vicariously. So someone will get baptized in your behalf with their physical body. And God will say, yeah, that counts, if they accept it. But, and this could be me making God in my own image. It still doesn't totally make sense to me. I still think, I think God will kind of judge us based off our hearts and based off who we are. And I think there's probably plenty of people who never believe in God that are better people than I am. And I don't know. It's hard to say. I could be dead wrong about it. I'm willing a little bit to bet that I'm not wrong enough to where I'm going to burn in hell. I hope that's the case. I mean, if I'm now, again, to Mormons' credit, they don't believe in a literal fiery hell. So like that's a little less scary. But I mean, if you talk to a Baptist or, some maybe other traditional Christian, they do literally believe that. And that's kind of terrifying to me. But to me, because that actually begs the question, like the fact that the Pope's saying that, like, well, then what's the point of religion, right? Like if you're the Pope and you're saying, well, yeah, if your dad's good, but he didn't follow our religion, it didn't matter. It's like, well, then why do you even have the religion? I think religion's still important, but I think it's more important for the present. And I think it's important, it brings a lot of people peace. It brings a lot of people purpose. And maybe, I've heard stories of people that aren't religious and they beat their kids and they're alcoholics and then they become religious and it changes their life. Like that is awesome, right? Like that's a great thing. I think religion fails though once it turns from I'm doing this because it brings me peace, because it brings me comfort, because it makes me a better person, to I'm doing this because I'm scared of the consequences of not doing it. That's where I think religion goes too far. Yeah.
So I know we're getting to the end, so I'm trying to like condense my questions.
No, you're good.
Do you think there's any theologic or like spiritual significance to angels and demons in terms of how they're portrayed switching? Or like the demons are the ugly ones and the like we were talking about earlier? Do you think there's any like do you think like in some way like is are like demons like influencing people to see it differently so that then they're more welcomed into people's hearts? I don't know. Like it's just like something I've been thinking about for this conversation.
Maybe. Yeah, I mean maybe. Joseph Smith had fascinating thoughts on angels and demons, to the point that like, so I don't know how familiar you are with the New Testament, but there's a verse in Galatians that people would always throw at me that says basically, even if a different gospel is preached to you by an angel than the gospel we're preaching, like don't follow it. And people would always throw that at Mormons and be like, see, you're not supposed to listen to an angel if it's different than the gospel of Jesus Christ. And we would argue, be like, no, we are teaching the same gospel of Jesus Christ. But Joseph Smith had this interesting theology that demons could present themselves as a messenger from God, like as an angel. And so he had this whole system of like being able to figure out, okay, is this a good guy? Is this a bad guy? And that gets complicated because then it's like, well, Joseph Smith, how did you know that angel that visited you the first time was a good guy? So yeah, I don't know much about the theology. I would be very agnostic when it comes to heavenly messengers and stuff. I have no reason to know or believe one way or another. I have a pretty non-literal view of the Bible personally. I think a lot of those things maybe didn't happen. There's pretty good history to show like Moses probably wasn't a real person, and it was probably just kind of a myth that was told. But then there's stuff that we know did happen, right? Like there's a historical record of Jesus existing. And yes, there's issues with the New Testament, but anyway, I won't go down that rabbit hole. But basically, because of that view of the Bible, like I think it's important because it's a record of people experiencing divine experiences, whether that means the literal physical miracles we read about, or whether this was just some sort of divine communication. And so that's what I take it from. I just try to learn from it. Okay, what did these people learn with their experience with the divine? Because we have thousands of years of people experiencing divine experiences, and not just from the Bible, right? I'm sort of a universalist in that, like, and in fact, that's part of my show is I'm planning on diving into other religions. So it's like maybe there's stuff in the Quran that teaches us how to learn about God. Maybe there's stuff in like the Bhagavad Gita that like the Hindus read that teaches us about experiences with the divine. So like, I just think unless you're an atheist, I think it's important or it's valuable to look at multiple people's experience because we're all humans. We're all trying to figure this out and just try to piece together, okay, what is God? How do we communicate with God? Who is God? Is there one God? Are there multiple gods? All these questions that, whether an atheist argues, okay, it's just an evolutionary response to not knowing stuff that we have religions, or whether there's something to it. Like, I don't think there's any reason to just, cast it to the wayside. I think it's interesting conversations to have. And that's my goal in life. Like, I'm non-dogmatic. I'm not stuck to any path now, but it's like, why not figure it out? I think it's interesting. I think it's fun. And just try to learn, whatever brings me happiness. And that's what I encourage to other people. And unless your belief is something that harms other people, but as long as your belief doesn't harm any other people, like believe whatever you want. And like, if it makes you happy, it makes your family happy, do it.
Sweet. And then, what are some books you recommend? They don't have to be religious, just like anything you think people would enjoy.
If people want to learn more about Mormon church history, there's a number of books. There's like 100 or more biographies on Joseph Smith because he's such a controversial historical figure. Two that I would recommend, one is from a believing standpoint, one's from a non-believing standpoint. So there's a book called No Man Knows My History by Fawn Brody. Some of the history on that has been debunked since then, but it was the first major biography of Joseph Smith that painted him in a bad light. In fact, the lady that wrote it got excommunicated from the church for writing it. But then in the recent years, there's a book called Rough Stone Rolling that's written by a believer, and he's probably the most person alive about Joseph Smith to this day. And I definitely recommend that. That's a pretty dense book. Someone who doesn't have a Mormon background might have a hard time reading that book just because it's really dense, and it's like 500 or 600 pages, I think, and it talks about very specific things with Joseph Smith's life. But really good. That's probably the most unbiased book I've read. I will admittedly say I'm barely in my life getting back into reading books. And I know that sounds sad, but I had about an 8 to 10 year stretch with my engineering career where between engineering school and my engineering career, I was just trying to digest engineering code books and other boring stuff like that. So I kind of stopped hobby reading, but I've started picking it up again. That's part of my podcast. I know he's kind of controversial. I enjoy things by C.S. Lewis. I think he's an interesting thinker. I know some people don't like him. I mean, he's definitely misogynistic and sexist with a lot of his stuff, but I like him. I like Mere Christianity. I like the Screw Tape Letters. If you want just kind of some general dumbed down Christian theology, I don't know. That's a few. I have other books I like, and but like I say, I'm ashamedly I'm getting back into reading more than I used to, and so hopefully that
What books are you on the lookout for? I can think of something for you.
What books am I on the lookout
Yeah,
for?
like a genre topic. If you're trying to get back out there, what are you trying to get back out
Um,
there in?
I enjoy history. I enjoy right now, like I said, as part of the podcast project, I'm going to be reading a lot of religious books, so like theology books and apologetic books, and like I even have I went on. So like right now, I'm focusing on Mormonism and Christianity. My next thing I'm focusing on as part of my podcast is Islam. So I actually went on the Islam subreddit and I was like, hey guys, like I'm a Christian, but I want to learn about Islam. And they were awesome. Like they were like, oh, sweet, read this, read this, read this. I got like 30 books to read, and I don't know if I'll read all of them, but I'm like, holy cow. And so yeah, if like if someone's listening to your podcast and let's say they're Hindu or I don't know, Jewish or whatever, totally, like if there's a book that you feel like you've read and it explains your belief system, email it to me and I would love to dive into that. And you've got a link to my show notes if people want to correspond with me. Like my email is always open to anyone. It's alternativemormonpodcast@gmail.com. And yeah, I just want to talk to anybody, talk to everybody, even if you believe differently than me. In fact, especially if you believe differently than me, because yeah, that's my goal, is just to discover, help other people on this journey of discovery with me.
At any point in this conversation, if you find value in it, please subscribe. It is hugely beneficial, and it tells Google and everyone out there that this is content worth watching. Thank you for everyone thus far who has commented, liked, subscribed, and told their friends.